Good afternoon and welcome to Writers Unplugged. This is a series that will air throughout the year in support of Cleveland Reads. Writers Unplugged is a chance to hear favorite writers or new to you writers or bookstore owners in conversation as if you were eavesdropping on them in a coffee shop or, in this case, a bookstore. Cleveland Reads is an initiative designed to improve literacy levels here in our community, and the mayor has challenged Clevelanders to collectively read 1 million books and or 10 million minutes. So congratulations, as of this weekend, 1.5 million books read and over 10 million minutes spent reading. My name is Jen Jumba. I'm a librarian at the Cleveland Public Library, the main branch. And one of my favorite things to do besides reading is talking to bookstore owners. It's an opportunity to get to know them and see them as more than just the name on the outside sign. So we are so lucky to have Cathryn Siegal-Bergman, writer, publisher, and owner of Clevo Books with us here in the Fifth Street Arcade. So before we get started, a couple quick housekeeping notes. To find out who else is visiting Writers Unplugged, both virtually and in person, go to clevelandreads.com/unplugged. So a brief introduction to Cathryn. Clevo Books was founded by Cathryn Siegal-Bergman. She moved to Cleveland at a young age, graduated from Cleveland State University with a bachelor's degree in philosophy in German. She later earned her master's degree in translation studies from the Institute for Applied Linguistics at Kent State University. Cathryn has worked as a freelance translator for various clients on different translated books, including publishers. She is a big believer in giving credit to translators who work so hard to provide us with different and unique fiction and nonfiction books. Cathryn has translated different cookbooks and other nonfiction books that then inspired her to create Clevo Books, and she hopes to share some of that enthusiasm with us today. So,
Thank you.
quite welcome. So, let's start a little bit at the beginning. Named Clevo Books. Where did the name of this bookstore come from?
When I was a teenager in Cleveland, I heard a lot of my friends referring to the city as Clevo for short, and that stuck with me all these years later. And I knew I wanted to have an homage to the city in some way, and so Clevo Books became the name.
Absolutely. How did you decide on the Fifth Street Arcade, which is just a wonderful treasure here in our city, right here on Euclid Avenue and Fifth? How did you decide this is where your bookstore should be?
Oh, well, I was fortunate enough to meet somebody from the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, and he showed me around the Fifth Street arcades, and this space happened to be empty. And based on the decor that was already here, I sort of fell in love with the space. And unfortunately, now we're sort of growing out of it, or maybe that's fortunate.
Yes.
But we love it.
I have to say it is a great space. And when one of my colleagues who's here this afternoon walked in, he's like, wow, what a great vibe. So it is a perfect bookstore vibe. We're sitting in comfy chairs. There's a sofa. There's books on display. The bookshelves, I'm actually jealous of them. Wish I had these in my house. And I feel a little bit better about the number of books I have at home. So yeah, it's just a wonderfully curated space. And then lots of other fun things here in the store.
Yeah, we have games and puzzles and stickers galore, magnets, other little trinkets.
So roughly how many different languages appear on your shelves? Because you've translated from a number of different. Do you have a rough ballpark?
We have 53 or 54 languages represented here.
Okay.
Authors from those languages on our shelves.
Yeah. It's amazing. So I'm joined by founder and owner of Clevo Books, Cathryn Siegal-Bergman. Cleveland's certainly a melting pot as a city, right? With lots of languages spoken, cultures preserved, and how fortunate we are to have a place like Clevo Books. So can you talk a little bit about why it was important to you to focus on translated works in this community?
Well, I feel like my whole life I've been looking at connecting people to things. What
Okay.
can I connect people with when it comes to translation? And it occurred to me that I could connect them to their heritage
Hmm.
if we have a translation from the Czech, for example.
Hmm.
People with Czech ancestry can learn about the Czech culture through reading their books. Um, that was kind of important. That was an important factor in founding Clevo Books.
Okay. Um, you studied and got your master's degree in translation studies and linguistics. What drew you to that field of study?
My experience with German really
Okay.
drew me to that. I met somebody who was a translator, and that piqued my interest.
Hmm.
And so I looked up programs and found one in our backyard at Kent State
All right.
University, and that the rest is history.
Yeah. How fortunate in life that we can meet somebody who completely kind of changes the direction
Yeah.
of our life and we find ourselves doing exactly what we were meant to be doing.
Yes,
Yeah. So you yourself translate books. Can
I
you
do.
talk a little bit about what that looks like, how you approach that?
Well, with going back, it started with reviewing the book that I was going to be translating to see if I felt like I could do it.
Okay.
Um, Once I decided that I could do it, it was really just a matter of sitting down and starting. Um, some translation doesn't require a lot of research. With something like going back, um, it's easy enough to just kind of plod along until
Yeah.
you get to a word that that you don't understand in the German, and you can't figure out what the translation would be
Right.
because you can't find it in the German either. And that was actually the case in going back, where two of the women referred to something called a lift.
Okay.
That's the German word, and it was really hard to find, but I did finally figure out that they meant shipping container.
Interesting. I mean, we all have different words for the same thing,
Hmm.
right? And to be able to be that granular in your work, to be able to find exactly what that is. I would have seen lift
Right.
and assumed elevator, but I'm not a translator
Exactly.
and nor do I speak German.
It was a false friend.
It was a false friend. So
Mhm.
obviously your research, how do you go about doing that research? Where do you go and turn to find out that that was a shipping container?
I rely a lot on the internet.
Okay.
None of the dictionaries that I could
Mm-mm.
find helped at all.
Okay.
It was hard to know sort of how old the term was, so it was kind of hard to know like how far back I could go in terms of dictionaries, that were
Right.
printed at a particular time.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I found a website finally that had an image of what I was looking for,
Yeah.
and it was a shipping container that was turned into, they were describing a shipping container that had been turned into a living space.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was a shipping container.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you do translations because language changes over time. I think about how, I talked in the 80s, right? And it's
Hmm.
different than how I talk now. So I would imagine that same thing happens when you're translating works that were set or written in a different time period to make sure that you're striking the right chord.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it was such a hard term to figure out,
Okay.
because I don't think anybody uses that term in German anymore
Okay.
for the same thing.
Yeah. Do you only translate German or do you translate other languages as
I
well?
only translate from the German.
Okay. Do you dream in German?
I do.
Okay. Truly immersed in the language. Yeah, I can remember studying in Spain and reading a book in English, but in my mind hearing it in Spanish.
Yeah,
And it wasn't until I started dreaming in Spanish that I was like, wow, I really kind of get this. So
yeah.
wouldn't hold true anymore. It's been a while, but um, I think it's fascinating that
Yeah.
you're able to do that. How long does it take you to translate a book, roughly?
Ah,
I guess it
it's
depends
going to
on the book.
depend on the book.
Right.
Um, I think when I think about just the actual work,
Mm-hmm.
I would say it took me about 6 months total to do the going back translation,
Okay.
first draft.
Okay.
And then I sent it to an editor who looked at it, and that probably took a month or two.
Okay.
And then going through the corrections and
Yes.
smoothing out some of the kinks in the translation was another process. Ultimately, I got the license to translate going back in 2015, late 2015, and it was published in 2018.
Okay. Wow.
So now it didn't have to take all that time.
Okay.
um, but it did.
Yes.
Some of our books are taking less time. But an average, a pretty good average, and a pretty good target is about a year for the translation.
Okay. Makes sense because it typically takes writers about a year to write a book. So I would
Hmm.
imagine a similar time frame to translate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm joined by owner and founder of Clevo Books, Cathryn Siegal-Bergman. Um, do you read the book in German first and then translate, or do you read like a chapter and translate? What's your approach
Well, with going back, I read the entire book first
in German?
in German.
Yeah.
Um, I was really gripped by it.
Mm-hmm.
I had already decided halfway through that I could translate it, but I was so enthralled by the book that I just finished it anyway. Sometimes sometimes all I need to do is read a chapter to know if I can translate it or not.
Okay.
Uh, um, Nowadays, though, it's kind of hard to find time to do the translating myself, and so I
Okay.
work with other translators to help out
Okay.
where I can't do the translating myself.
Yeah. Do you when you're reading, is any of the work by writers that are still alive, and do they ever comment on your translated version?
Um,
Or
I have no way of knowing if anybody has commented on the books that I worked on before starting Clevo Books.
hmm
But I've been in contact with the author, Andrea von Treuenfeld, who did Going Back.
right,
Um,
that's just an incredible story.
yeah, but I don't recall her having any sort of comments about the translation itself.
More
Um,
excited that more people are
yeah,
able to read this story.
Yeah, I think she feels like it was an important story. Well, they were important stories to share.
Okay.
And so I think she was grateful that we were able to expand
Do
the
you
number
mind?
of readers.
Yeah. Do you mind giving us a brief overview? I've been fortunate to have heard the story before, but will you share a little bit to those listening and
Going
watching?
Back
Yes.
is a collection of life stories from 16 different women uh, who were born in Germany, raised Jewish, and fled Germany before the Nazis could get them, and lived abroad for a number of years,
hmm
and then all moved back. And some of them were children when they moved back. They were still children. Some of them were adults. They were gone for 50, 60 years and they went back.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the great thing about nonfiction is when you're telling stories from a personal perspective, it brings that, granted, it was an awful time period in history, but
Yes.
it brings it to life when you have a name and a face and a story about how they handled the situation.
I found it very interesting to tell the story of people who did go abroad. I found that it was interesting that they had gone back, that Germany had become a place that would welcome them again.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, given how many people are migrating around the world
hmm
because of strife,
hmm
it's an interesting question. Can those countries ever welcome those people back again?
Right.
So I found it interesting for that reason, but also their life stories were so uplifting.
Hmm.
The struggle of not knowing a language when you move to a foreign country and having to learn it on the as you go.
Yeah. Otherwise, you can't, eat, or you can't find a place
Work.
to live and
Yes.
work. Yeah. All the
Mm-hmm.
things that we kind of take for granted
Yeah,
today.
exactly.
But being able to do that, I mean, they're tough women and
Yeah.
an example.
So how they overcame all of that was very, very interesting to see.
Absolutely. And then it also, I mean, you talked about would that country welcome them back, but it also
Mm,
makes me think, would I want to go back to a place that treated me that
exactly.
way? So, I mean,
Exactly.
it's a very interesting
One of the
question.
women was shunned by her friends who didn't
Really?
want them to go back. Yeah. They lost a lot of friends because they went back.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm joined by founder and owner of Clevo Books, Cathryn Siegal-Bergman. So you mentioned you have translated cookbooks,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I'm struck by how important this is because so much of our heritage is connected to food. I think about
Yes.
like this is the holiday season that's coming up. And I think about my family. My heritage is Polish, and we do the traditional Velia Christmas Eve dinner.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's hard to preserve the language itself, but through food, that culture continues for generations to come.
Mm-hmm.
Next weekend is like the annual pierogi making party. So there's 3 generations of us that get together to prepare them for Christmas Eve. And thank goodness that has been passed down.
Mm-hmm.
And all the wonderful cookbooks you have here in the store do the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
So you talked earlier about connecting people, and what
With their
better way to
heritage.
exactly to connect people with their heritage than through food.
Yes.
So Clevo Books, right, has something for everyone. There's books for children, adults, multiple genres. Is there a particular either language or genre that seems to be the most popular in here?
Japanese
Okay.
gets a lot of attention, I think. People are very interested in Japanese culture at the moment and
Yeah.
find the books and the literature that come from Japan interesting.
Yeah.
So we sell a lot of Japanese titles.
Okay.
Um, German and French, because those two languages produce the most literature.
Okay.
So by default, we sell a lot of those.
Okay.
And then I would say Spanish
Yeah.
is also Spanish and Russian.
It makes sense because
Mm-hmm.
there's a large Hispanic community here, as well as Russian or Eastern European.
Yeah.
So makes
Mm-hmm.
sense that they have a place in their kids who may not know the language, or grandkids, but can still know and
Yeah.
feel that sense of connection to their family members,
Yeah.
for sure.
We do have people who come in and ask specifically for books that have been translated from a language that their parents may have spoken growing up.
Okay.
And they're interested in reading books from that language.
I think that would make for like an interesting discussion, right? If
Mm-hmm.
if it's, their parents that spoke the language and they might not, and to be able to read the same book and have a discussion
Exactly.
and not that sense of disconnect because they weren't able to read it. So what a gift you've
Yeah.
given people to be able to have those
Another way to
conversations.
connect with your
It's
heritage.
exactly right. Exactly right. So I'm joined by founder and owner of Clevo Books, Cathryn Siegal-Bergman. And I have to say, every time I walk past these doors, I have to come in for one book, and I leave with way more than one book. So I think you and your colleague Mark do a wonderful job. You curate these amazing displays. I'm looking around right now, and as I'm sitting here before we started recording, I'm like, well, I have to have that one too. And I already bought stuff. How do you decide what goes on display?
I think we start with the idea of displaying newer books
Okay.
that come in, not necessarily new stories.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we've got Snow White on display,
Yes.
but it's a newer translation in a collectible package,
It's gorgeous.
and yes, and it just is appealing to look at, and so it ends up on display. Um, I think we tend to favor more new releases when
Mm-hmm.
we display them. We are also interested in displaying different books of different genres to people who might find them attractive as well.
Yeah, I kind of tend to gravitate towards the mystery display
Yeah.
almost every single time. And then you have a display that has Cathryn's picks, right? So it's
Yes, on the
on the counter.
counter,
So
right.
like just when you think you're done, but wait, there's more. So, and you have wonderful things at the counter as well. Stickers. I think the one I bought was easily distracted by books. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The window displays are
Mm-hmm.
pretty thematic.
Mm-hmm.
We've got children's books on display in the window.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Clevo Books on
Yes.
display, and logo items. We have art books
Mm-hmm.
and science fiction
Mm-hmm.
books, nonfiction and fiction books on display in the windows.
Right.
So, and
Yeah,
then
so
we try
something
to
for
do
everybody walking
something,
past. Yeah.
we try to have one shelf that changes every month depending
Yes.
on what the theme is. And for example, August is Women in Translation Month. So we
Okay.
will have a window display for just that theme.
Wonderful. That's awesome. So there's a phrase that readers talk about called armchair travel, right? Which is the ability for us to travel via a book, right?
Hmm.
Places around the world, and it's great to sometimes, escape and see a different setting, a different part of the world through a book, right? So how many people come in here and look for a particular destination? And then how many
Yeah, it's
people
happened.
plan a trip based on something they've read here?
Um, I've had a customer plan a trip based on buying the book Provence.
Mm-hmm.
To that region, which I recommend doing if you can.
Mm-hmm.
That particular cookbook is specifically about a lot of the producers in the region that
Mm-hmm.
you can visit. And there are some, retail shops that are mentioned
Yes.
that you can visit and markets that you can visit. And I think that's really great. It's a love affair with the region of Provence, but it's also a travel guide
Right.
as well as a recipe book.
Right. So that when you go and travel to that place and eat that
Hmm.
wonderful food, that you can try to replicate it once you get home.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful.
Or for people for whom international travel just isn't functional,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to bring it home
Mm-hmm.
is very nice. It's a very nice option.
Absolutely. So I'm joined by founder and owner of Clevo Books, Cathryn Siegal-Bergman, and one of the gateways. There's roughly 4 gateways by which people enter a book. So
Hmm.
people read for character. People might read for story. People might read for language or for setting.
Hmm.
So I think that speaks to what's on your shelves is that there's something here for everybody, but how important setting features that I might not be able to ever go to this part of the world, but
Right.
I feel like I have after I'm done reading
Yeah.
one of the books here.
Right.
So,
Um,
and there's
I'm
no jet lag, right?
there's no jet lag. No, you
Right.
can just you can travel through time as well
Yeah.
as through space just by reading a book, and I think that's great.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the shelves and just thinking about all the places that we have left to visit when you come in here. So, um, can you share with us, the value of having translated books readily accessible here? What does that mean?
Well, I think the most important thing for me was to be able to connect
Yeah.
people with their heritage,
Okay.
and so or connect people with parts of the world that they want to understand a little better.
Right.
Um, that is what's really important about translation and what translation is able to do for people. It's great if you can speak French or if you can speak Spanish, but
Mhm.
nobody is expected to be able to speak both French and Spanish and Turkish
No.
and Russian.
Yeah.
Very few people speak Finnish, for example. And so if you want to understand the Finnish culture, you need to read a translated book.
Right. I remember several years ago when The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo came out. right?
Mhm.
And there was this huge push for Scandinavian noir and
Mhm.
crime and mystery. And I think it kind of at least opened my eyes. And there, now other places I want to see based on the books that I've read. So I think
Yes.
it's a tremendous gift that you give people is the
Yes.
ability to
Thank
say,
you.
yeah, I would love to go here based on reading this, or before I go here, I have a better understanding of the place that I'm going to visit. Some of the
Right.
subtleties in terms of language, in the nuances of languages, the nuances of the culture that are captured in a book that you wouldn't find in a travel guide.
Yes, exactly. And those particular books offer insight into the
Mhm.
social politics
Absolutely.
of those countries.
Right, which is
And
important.
yeah, it's good to be culturally savvy.
Absolutely.
And reading books in translation is one way to gain that savviness.
Right. And I also think, as any reader, people want to see themselves in books, right? And so if
Mm,
we know that Cleveland is this amazing community of people from all over different parts of the world, that they can walk in here to Clevo Books and find something on the shelf where they see themselves or they see their family or they see
yes,
their past in a book.
exactly. Exactly. We have books that have been translated from Arabic, and
Hmm.
so people with Arab heritage
Hmm.
can come here, even if they don't speak Arabic. They can read books that were translated from the language, and read about people that they can relate to.
Right.
I think that's fantastic. We have, like I said, 53 or 54 languages represented,
Yeah,
and hopefully we'll find more.
absolutely.
Um, we really want to make those connections.
Absolutely. It's all about, the whole, push now for being diverse and equitable and inclusive.
Hmm.
And what better way to do that through books that bring people together? And even I'm thinking people coming in here for one book and running into somebody else who shares that similar culture and
Exactly.
heritage and,
Hmm.
making that connection there as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's a gift to the community. So, absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So, let's see what else do I want to ask. So the other thing I think about is the duality, right? Like I think on one hand, the world is this incredibly large place, so many places to visit. And then the other hand, I think like how small of a world because we're able to find that connection between a reader and a book.
Hmm.
And just being able to have two of those things at the same time, I think is a tremendous, gift to readers, gift to the community.
Yeah, I think reading does make the world feel a little bit smaller when you get to know
Mhm.
different cultures and familiarize yourself with how other people live around the world, or how other people solve problems around the world or
Mhm.
deal with emotions around the world. Um, it helps you understand your own culture
Yeah,
a
right.
lot better.
It does, and then I would also say that it makes you a better human being because you've been exposed to different perspectives and experiences and much
Different
more
problem
empathetic.
solving
Yes.
ideas, different coping ideas.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the next best thing I think to being a librarian, right, is owning a bookstore. Um, so I just want again to get people to come in here and see this fabulous space, the way that it's set up, and not only that, but you and your colleague Mark are wonderful with connecting the right book with the person who walks in here. You know the stories so well, and you get to know the person that walks in here to be able to hand sell and recommend just the right book. I can't tell you how many times they've come in here and I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking for, but yet somehow you knew exactly what I wanted to read at that point in time. So,
That's I think, I want to call it a skill, but it's more of a practiced one.
yes. Yeah, no, you can't
We have to
possibly
try
read.
to read as much as possible. And
Right.
it's impossible to read every book, but we have to try to know what books are available
Hmm.
in our store so that we can do that for people.
Yeah.
And it's fun, first of all,
Yeah.
to learn about all these different books, and it's really fun to find the right one for the right person.
Absolutely. So I'm joined by founder and owner of Clevo Books, Cathryn Siegal-Bergman. So this Writers Unplugged is a series that's in support of Cleveland Reads,
Hmm.
which is focused on literacy. Will you talk a little bit about why literacy is important to you?
Well, I think reading is important to me because, as I said, it's a way of learning how to navigate the world. Um, whether it's in English or translated from a foreign language,
Mm-hmm.
you are exposed to different events
Mm-hmm.
and different ways that you could react to those events.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at this at books in one genre, for example, you don't just have one story that's told over and over again. You have lots of different stories that are told within that genre. Just and the events may sometimes be similar,
Mm-hmm.
but people handle their emotions differently, or they may react differently.
Right.
And
Or
it's neat to sort of build a world
mm-hmm.
around many of the stories that you read, and you can call on that reading experience to help you cope with real life events in
Absolutely.
your own life.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I read a lot of mystery, and so being able to see the systems in other countries and how they work in terms of, policing and in terms of law, it's always eye-opening to see and realize, just how fortunate we are here. Sometimes it
Yes.
might not seem like it, but for the most part, absolutely.
Oh, I think we're very
We
lucky.
are very, very lucky. So, final 5 questions.
Hmm.
Where is your favorite place to read?
In bed.
In bed. Okay.
Hmm.
You can speak several languages. What is one language that you would like to learn that you have not?
Either Scandinavian languages
Mhm.
or Japanese.
Ooh. What's the best thing about owning a bookstore?
Meeting people and connecting them with a book that they like.
Who's your favorite musician that you would want to see live in concert?
Oh, definitely Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo.
Yeah, local, right?
Yes.
Let's say you were locked in your bookstore. You had no way to escape. What is the first book you would pick up and read?
Well, as we were sitting here earlier, I noticed there's a book here called No Escape from the Alhambra by Kirsten uh, Boy,
Mm-hmm.
and it was translated from the German. And I thought, wait a minute, No Escape from the Alhambra. Maybe that's a locked room mystery or an adventure kind of thing. And maybe I
Yeah.
would get some clues that would get me out
Yes,
of this locked bookstore.
absolutely. Actually, I don't know that I would want to leave a locked bookstore, but that's just me. So I want to say a big thank you, Cathryn, for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to our tech team
It's my pleasure.
for
Thank
making.
you very much.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite places. And then thanks to all of you who are watching and listening to Writers Unplugged and sharing the love of reading with one another. Jen Jumba from the Cleveland Public Library. Happy reading.